the name of the one who was and is to come, the Almighty. Amen. So these texts are so incredibly rich this morning, and I wish I could unpack absolutely every little morsel contained therein, but I cannot. So I have to choose very carefully about how to do it just right, and what I feel like God needs us to hear this morning in these texts, especially that gospel text, which is from the Gospel of John. I want to start, though, by talking about Isaiah. It'll help us. It'll help us because the language within the prophets is often very vivid and very emotionally laden, and has a way of setting the stage for how the people of Israel in Jesus' time are going to hear what Jesus is doing and hear with the ear of their spirit as much as by seeing what he does. I wonder if when that text was read just now, Isaiah 62, anybody here whose mind just went, that sounds really weird. That the land shall be married. Has anyone here ever attended a land wedding? I mean, it's a strange image, that the land shall be married. Well, there's other words there that are really important. You shall not be forsaken. You shall not be desolate. You'll be something other than that. Married. Beloved. It kind of ties on to last week's a little bit, but the language here is very emotionally laden and even kind of romantic. And what it's saying is something about the way God regards his people and the covenant that had been made with Abraham. Remember, they had been taken into exile. Being forsaken and desolate was who they understood themselves to now be. They did not understand themselves to be married to God, in that sense of God's very special, intimate relationship with them. They wondered, maybe it's all over. Maybe we're all done with that. So here in Isaiah is this beautiful proclamation in that language that is found actually quite often throughout the Old Testament that describes God as a husband and Israel, the people, as the bride. It's a metaphor. It is a way of saying that God's love is so profound, and it is meant to be everything that you would expect, ideally in a marriage, right? Fruitful and happy. And it's a promise in that text that it will be that. So now, let's listen to the Gospel of John. It begins with a very important little line. On the third day, Jesus went to a wedding in Cana of Galilee. On the third day. So, how many of you, instantly, you have ears to hear something about the third day? Right? The third day. Well, if you're not that familiar with the Gospels, the third day is the day of resurrection. So right away, in John chapter 2, the very beginning of John's Gospel, he's already giving us incredible, we might say, foreshadowing of where everything is going to lead. On the third day, Jesus went to a wedding. A wedding should be what? Happy, expectant, joyful. And perhaps the actual ceremony was, but there's a problem in this setting, isn't there? What happens? The wine has run out. Now you have to understand something about the Gospel of John. Everything happens on more than one level at once. There is always the actual, physical, practical element. They're at a wedding. The wine ran out. It's a disaster. I mean, it just is. That's not what anybody wants to have happen 2,000 years ago or today. It would just be, it's not like the couple isn't going to be married, but it's just not what you want to have happen. The expectation goes way, way down, doesn't it? Just like the people in Israel in exile. It shouldn't be like this. Our life should be different than this. But here we are. And in Isaiah, God gives a message of hope. And look what happens here in the Gospel of John. Jesus causes water to become wine. It is the practical thing. Just take care of the problem. When you're the Lord of all, you can do that. You can say to the elements, water become wine. And it happens. But we so miss everything in this story if that's all we hear in this moment. Because John uses the language about this is the first of his signs. And the sign is not only that Jesus has the ability to control elemental things, like turning water to wine. That's part of it. You know, the Lord of all, he can do that. So much more, though, going on here. At this moment, Jesus says, see those jars over there? I want you to take those. Did you notice what those jars were in the text? Mm-hmm. For purification. A rite in which a person uses water to, in a sense, ritually restore themselves in a relationship with God that is right. Fill them with water. That's what they're used for. It's very, very significant that John then has those vessels, the vessels of the right relationship with God, that is where water is changed to wine, and not just any wine, but the very best wine. You see where I'm going with this? Have you ever felt in your life that perhaps the wine has just run out? I mean, that's actually what happened in the story, but there's something deeper here, isn't it? Which one of us does not understand the language here in that deeper spiritual kind of sense? You've been at the end of your rope. The wine has run out. My life was supposed to go this way, but this is how it's ended up. Maybe I'm the only one talking. Am I talking to myself? You're all being very quiet. That must mean that either I'm talking to myself or I'm hitting very close to experience that we all understand. Wine has run out. And that is precisely the place in which Jesus steps and gives the first of many signs in John's gospel to say, I have come, keep the party going. I have come to bring new wine. And not only is it, enough, crazy amounts. Did you see the amounts? They're listed there. John gives us the details. 20 to 30 gallons each, times it by 6. This party's going on for a long time. That's a lot of wine to be drinking. It's, in fact, an exaggeration, isn't it? It's more wine than anybody could ever possibly drink. It's talking about the outpouring of God's presence and the restoration of a people. Yes, it's about the wedding and wine, but it's about that deeper level of redemption. I have come right at the precise moment when the wine has run out to bring you something you can't even possibly imagine how awesome it is. To bring life. To bring a purification that you can't manage on your own. It's an incredible story. And it's incredible how the people in the story respond. You have the servants who are just watching. Wow, that's pretty cool. Right? They saw it happen. They're kind of the invisible people in the background waiting on everybody else, but they got to see. And then the steward who is given the wine and his, wait a minute. I'm going to talk about this next week further, about this steward, but he has an interesting response, I think. His response is, wait a minute, this breaks protocol. Now, isn't that an interesting thing? It breaks protocol. Do you remember when we talked about Here a few summers ago, we did the study on Revelation, and I had that one key little thing that tries to help us to don't miss the forest for the trees. Here you have the steward who's concerned about the protocol. Most people serve the wine, you've got it mixed up. Good wine first, bad wine last after everybody's drunk. What are you doing? The protocol's messed up. Is that all this poor guy can see that's going on here? Wow, that's worth some thought. Interesting how your perspective can be blinded. We'll come back to that guy next week. I got more on him. The third response in this story are the disciples. The disciples are there too, and they witness it. And what does it say for them? They believed. They believed. They knew something was going on here that had much greater significance. So, I want to challenge you this morning. The Gospel of John is written in such a way that Jesus does signs throughout. The signs point to something. What are they pointing to? Well, they point to the end of the story. You have to go read it to find out. We know what it is, right? The death and resurrection. But as those unfold, as the narrative unfolds, John's way of telling the story of Jesus' life and his preaching ministry are such that he leaves you hanging. He leaves you hanging. He doesn't give you the narrative conclusion. For example, in the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they will tell a story, and then they will say at the end, go and do likewise. You get an instruction. Okay, I can sink my teeth into that. I know I'm supposed to go do something with myself or with my head or my thinking or my heart or whatever. John's gospel doesn't do that. John's gospel just leaves it hanging. The disciples believed him. The difference that belief makes in how they follow, that's an interesting question. That's what I want to challenge you about. The text doesn't give us an answer. I'm not going to give you an answer. You have to settle with that yourself. What does it mean to believe that Jesus brings a sign? What does it mean for you, your understanding of Christ and the work of Christ and Christianity as a whole, to hear this story of Jesus turning water into wine at that very moment, not just at this wedding party where the wine runs out, but in the history of humanity, where the wine is always seeming to run out? That's the moment, that's the precise time in which God shows up to say, I got you covered. It may seem like all is lost, but the best is coming. Is that something that you can believe? Is it something that you do believe? Or maybe you struggle with belief. I don't know where you are. I think the Holy Spirit does, though. And there's some really powerful food for thought here about how much we can or cannot trust God. We had conversation after the 8 o'clock service because that particular point of the image of the wine running out, or the wine gave out, we got to talking about kind of the state of the whole world. I mean, it seems like there is a lot of despair and fear. Not just in our own community, but in the country, in the world in general. And it would be very easy to think or to feel or to believe that God's done with us as a race. Those wacky humans. I've told them again and again how to love each other, and they can't seem to get it right. It would be easy for us to fall into a moment of despair, wouldn't it? I hear it. I hear it in people's voices. And yet here is this text, which we get on the second Sunday of Epiphany, to remind us of a central truth of the Gospels. You can't sink so low or God can't reach you. You can be out of wine, but it's not for long. He comes to keep the party going. He comes to bring what you've never even imagined was possible. He comes to bring restoration and purification and the unity of a people. There's great power in this sign, the first of many, in which the Gospel of John will remind us again and again and again. And I could ask you, what is it that you believe? In whom do you believe? We can have that conversation, if you like, outside of church. It'd be great. I love it. Bring it. But really, whether we have that conversation or not, the offer is made. There's wine to be had. And a lot of it. Yes. Because that's how God is. So I can ask the questions, but I'm the preacher and I'm here to tell you, yes, it is real. Yes, you can trust God. Yes, you can believe in abundance. Yes, you can have hope. Why? Because here is one of many signs that God has given in the gospel witness. That we are not left to death. We are not left to despair. We are a people of hope. We're a people with 6 30-gallon jars of wine. Just to make sure that we don't miss the point. You know, there's always exaggeration in the Gospels. I love it. You know, the feeding of the 5,000, how many baskets are left over? 12 baskets left over. There's always an abundance with God. And I'm suggesting you trust it. I'm suggesting that we all hold on to that. And most especially today, if you come here and you have a feeling, kind of an existential feeling maybe, that the wine has run out, I'm here to tell you otherwise. The text is here to tell you otherwise. He comes, and he comes to bring new wine. He comes to bring redemption and healing to everyone who will receive it, who has ears to hear and eyes to see. And just that much faith to say, yeah, I think God's good. As God's go, I think God's pretty darn good. It's faith. It makes a difference. I hope you trust what God has done and what God keeps doing.